This is Chapter 2 of Runner by Deuker. Brent Miller. My eyes turned back to the front of the class. I looked and then looked again. The last time I'd seen Miller, he had green-tipped hair, wore ripped pants that hung down to his thighs, and was drinking wine and smoking dope at Salmon Bay Park with a bunch of guys who looked just like him. Miller had been a senior at Lincoln High when I'd entered as a freshman. But I'd known him before that, known him and hated him. His dad was a vet of the First Gulf War, just like my dad, and his dad was a drunk, just like mine. The two of them had hung out at the same taverns along Ballard Avenue. Sometimes Miller and I would be stuck together in his dad's crummy apartment or in my dad's smelly sailboat while our fathers drank themselves into stupors. It didn't happen often, every couple of months or so, but once would have been one time too many. Brent and I would spend the hours glaring at each other. A few weeks before I started at Lincoln High, Miller's dad and my dad got into some sort of shouting match at the Sunset Tavern. The bartender threw them both out, and on the sidewalk the shouting match turned into a brawl. My dad ended up in jail for a couple of days. Miller's dad ended up at Harborview Hospital for the same amount of time. I kicked his butt good, my dad told me when he got out. Once school started, Miller made me pay. Every chance he got, he'd shove me up against the lockers and squeeze my face with his fat hand, putting on a big show for his friends. "You think this is bad?" he'd say. "Someday I'm going to get you alone, then you'll find out what bad really is." Just before Christmas break, a message came to me during math class. I was to report to the office immediately. I was afraid something had happened to my dad. I was always afraid of that. He's not like drunk fathers in books. They're always no good bastards who even beat their kids and their wives. My dad never hit me, never yelled at me. He was just a drunk. I hustled down the main hallway, turned into a side hall that led to the office, and came face to face with Miller and one of his friends. Miller grabbed me, spun me around, and put his hand over my mouth. Then the two of them dragged me into the boys' bathroom and kicked open the door to one of the stalls. They flipped me over and started dunking my head into a toilet that was full of crap and pee. I wanted to scream, but I had to hold my breath. They'd pull me up, I'd gulp some air, and then they'd dunk me again. After doing that 6 or 7 times, they started flushing the toilet. I'd hear the roar of the water and the two of them laughing, then one more roaring and more laughter. Finally, after what seemed like an hour but was probably a minute, they dropped me. My head smacked against the porcelain toilet bowl. I ended up on my knees, gasping for breath, with snot coming out of my nose and toilet water dripping out of my hair. Miller leaned down close to me. Your old man got kicked out of the army for being a piece of crap coward, and you're just like him." With that, he and his friend were gone. A couple of minutes later, some big guy, one of the football players wearing his letterman's jacket, came into the bathroom. I was sitting on the floor, crying and shaking. My face was bruised and my nose was bleeding. He picked me up by the shoulders, led me over to the sink, turned the faucet on, and then stood by me as I splashed warm water onto my face. He stayed with me until I'd cleaned myself up and the shaking and crying had stopped. "I got to get back to class," he said at last, "but you tell Miss Dugan who did this to you, and she'll take care of them." "I will," I said, my voice shaky, but I never did.